Thanks, Ren, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you also to the ARM and the sponsors for the opportunity to present to you this afternoon. I'll set the scene a little with a few slides here, and then we'll go to the Q&A with Ren shortly after that. We are a publicly traded company on the Australian Stock Exchange, so please do refer to our filings and our website for further information in relation to our technologies. As Ren mentioned, we are developing a unique patented technology for the mass production of therapeutic MSCs, mesenchymal stem cells, sometimes called mesenchymal stromal cells, but essentially a therapeutic MSC product. And we have underway at the moment the world's first clinical study using an iPSC-generated allogeneic therapeutic stem cell product. A snapshot of our financial information. The company's market cap at the moment is about slightly over $100 million US. We have around 2,500 shareholders, the largest of which is Fujifilm Corporation of Japan, that joined our register last year as part of a strategic alliance. And we have around 12 months cash based on our current burn rate. The stock's enjoyed a nice run over the past couple of months in response to news about our clinical study, which I'll talk more about in a second. As we've heard with the previous presenter, there is an enormous amount of interest in the therapeutic potential of mesenchymal stem cells. And in fact, there are more than 650 clinical studies underway around the world at the moment with MSCs, which is a testament to the enormous interest in their therapeutic potential. The major challenges that we face, particularly in ageing populations, such as heart attack, stroke, osteoarthritis, are diseases which are showing great promise for therapeutic intervention using MSCs. But the challenge in ultimately industrialising these very exciting products is not so much necessarily safety and efficacy, which of course has to be proven, but in the ability to manufacture sufficient quantities of the product consistently, reliably, and economically. And this challenge was summarised, I think, very succinctly by Jacques Gallipeau, one of the more prolific observers in this space, where he said that the excessive culture expansion is the most egregious divergence between commercial and MS and academic MSC products, when he was making some observations about the exciting results in early stage clinical studies, but the less than exciting results in later stage phase 2 and phase 3 sometimes. Our manufacturing platform solves that challenge. Quite simply, we use cells from one donor, one time, to manufacture an iPSC master cell bank, which allows us to massively expand those cells consistently and reliably, and then the final step of manufacture, we produce a very fresh, robust MSC product. In other words, every time we turn the handle, we get exactly the same product. Therefore, we get consistent product quality, we maintain high product efficacy, we have efficient process for production scale-up, and of course, since we only need one donor at one time, it's a very cost-effective manufacturing solution. We now have underway a clinical study in graft versus host disease in adult patients who have failed the standard of care, which is corticosteroids, and that study recently reported day 100 data in the first cohort of 8 adult patients. I'm pleased to say that from a safety point of view, we saw no treatment-related adverse effects. We saw an overall response rate in the patient population of 100%. All 8 patients showed an improvement in their severity of GVHD by at least 1 grade. The overall survival of the patients was 7 out of 8, 87.5%. We had 1 patient die as a consequence of pneumonia, which is a common cause of death in patients with GVHD. And most excitingly, we saw a complete response rate in 50% of the patients. That's a complete abrogation of symptoms. So we were very excited about this data, as was the market. And it's important to point out that the prognosis for these patients once they've failed corticosteroid therapy is usually very poor. So this is really a life-changing set of results for those patients in the trial. The second half of the trial is now underway, a further 8 patients, and we expect to report those results in the next couple of months. So in summary, we have a unique technology for the mass production of MSCs, a world-first clinical trial that's underway at the moment, which we'll report in the next couple of months, so some very exciting data ahead. A large and active growing market for an effective MSC product. We have a partnership already with Fujifilm for GVHD. Fujifilm is one of the most active companies in this stem cell space, and a strong balance sheet. So I'll leave it to you, Ren, to take over.
Yep. Great. Just as you get comfortable. There seems to be a paradigm shift, I think, in the industry when it comes to iPSCs. Its practical utility and, frankly, its potential and efficacy. I guess, can you talk a little bit more in detail about your platform, and how, I guess, you're seeing that kind of going forward? Can it expand beyond these indications? Just a little bit more color for the audience.
Well, I think the advent of iPSCs, induced pluripotent stem cells, has opened up many, many doors in medicine, and not just in our area for the manufacture of MSCs, but as these cells are pluripotent, they have the capacity to generate, under the right circumstances, any tissue type in the body. So the opportunities, for example, for producing cells from diseased patients just for research purposes and to do drug screening has been a revolution, not to mention the potential therapeutic application of, for example, dopaminergic neurons that are derived from iPSCs, which will shortly commence a clinical study in Parkinson's disease. Myocardial tissue, for example, to repair cardiac damage post-MI. These are just some of the areas where iPSCs are showing enormous potential. Now, of course, there is still the question mark of safety that faces any therapeutic product, and in our program we've been very cautious to ensure that we've had a very thorough safety program leading up to the clinical study, and as I reported in the slides just before, we saw a very clean safety profile, which of course was very encouraging, but it's still obviously early days yet. But I think the early concerns about safety surrounding iPSCs are now being addressed by an immense body of literature that demonstrates the original sort of members of the Flat Earth Society that used to think that iPSCs were particularly nasty is now being diminished. And so the opportunities are growing, and of course our study, which as I mentioned is the first of its kind using an iPSC generated tissue, first clinical study, is sort of paving the way to some extent. We've seen a study which is a physician-sponsored study in Japan already underway, but this is the first clinical trial.
Just maybe from just dovetailing off that, from a regulatory perspective, are there any issues that we need to worry about, or have they largely accepted all the data that's being generated in the iPSC-derived set of therapies?
In order to secure clinical trial approval in the UK, which is where our trial is underway at sites there and in Australia, we obviously presented to the UK regulatory agency, the MHRA, a substantial body of preclinical safety data, but also a body of data around the process used to manufacture the MSC product. So QA, QC and release specifications, which clearly satisfied the UK agency. We engaged with the FDA last year in a pre-IND meeting and have a clear understanding of what the FDA's expectations are from a safety point of view as well. I think if we were trying to do this 10 years ago, as Donna explained before, there would have been a much more challenging proposition to get the agency's head around this type of approach to product manufacture. But literature and data speaks enormous volumes, and I think that's helped assist the agencies to get more comfortable. I mean, clearly there's specific and unique safety questions concerning products of our derived using our process, but I think I'm glad that we're doing it today than back in 1985, for example.
So a couple of companies we announced earlier. I was talking probably about my second question about how the space is a graveyard. That's not the case in GVHD, although it could be considered overcrowded in that there are a lot of companies going after looking at therapeutics in the space. So can you talk a little bit about maybe what you've learned from the past of people who have tried to come up to work on therapeutics for GVHD, and I guess more importantly, how you're positioning yourself going forward in this space?
Yeah, it's no doubt there's a lot of interest in rare diseases, and of course GVHD, thankfully, is a relatively unusual disease. In fact, we recently were successful in our application for orphan drug designation with the FDA. So yes, it will be a competitive landscape. Obviously, we believe we've got a very competitive product based on the data that we've seen so far, and if that bears out in later stage clinical studies, then it really will be. I mean, the data that we showed was on 2 doses. Some of the other studies are on much higher numbers of doses, so on a sort of a cost per treatment basis, on a cost of goods, it's lower. But for us, in many ways, GVHD was a door opener that allows us to demonstrate clinical efficacy and therefore give us confidence to go forward to some of the other more commercially interesting opportunities that I mentioned in the earlier slide, knowing that we have a very potent and effective product, at least in GVHD, but clearly in humans, which gives us some comfort. And that is backed up in many cases by a number of preclinical studies that we have underway at the moment. So I think, again, GVHD is an attractive target for us for those particular reasons that are specific to Cynata and proving that iPSC-generated MSCs work. But then the bigger game, of course, is those much larger therapeutic indications like stroke, for example, or osteoarthritis, autoimmune diseases, and many others in which MSCs appear to be promising.
So you got Fujifilm as a partner, and they took an equity stake. I think you also have another partnership as well, Cellularity. Can you talk a little bit about those partnerships? What they bring to the table for you, and maybe what sort of synergies you might utilize in terms of pipelines between the companies.
Well, partnerships for a small Australian company are very, very important, both from a validation point of view to give investors confidence that Big Brother has run the ruler over the company and found the technology to be solid. And they also provide, of course, that very, very important resource, expertise, market access. In Fujifilm's case, they obviously have been very, very active in acquiring technologies and companies in the more broad regenerative medicine space. They acquired Cellular Dynamics a couple of years ago, which coincidentally was spun out of the same academic institution as Cynata. So Fujifilm's a great partner for us for GVHD. They have a growing manufacturing expertise, which will obviously be useful as we move the product forward as well. Our partnership, or our relationship, I should say, with Cellularity is a recognition that comes from a personal relationship that I have with the CEO at Cellularity, Bob Hariri, in seeing that in this space there is potential for companies to get their heads together and to figure out ways in which 2 + 2 = 6. And we haven't defined the nature of any potential future business transaction we may contemplate down the track, but at least we're talking about those sorts of targets where we can bring our forces together in some way and produce a better outcome for investors.
Sorry, just follow up with the Fuji relationship. How does how much input do they have on the ongoing development, right, in GVHD? Do they completely take it over, or you guys have a joint, joint coalition, as you move forward?
At the moment, we're running the show for the phase 1, but if Fujifilm decides to proceed, then all of the post-phase 1 activities will be undertaken by Fujifilm at their cost. So it's totally off our P&L. So bringing a GVHD product to market, if that's where Fujifilm want to go eventually, and of course we hope they will be at their cost. So it's not going to be financed by our investors, but obviously we receive a return in the form of milestone payments and eventually royalties on product sale.
Right now, however, we're funding it. It's our show, and we're obviously keeping them informed. But we'll have a seat at the table going forward, but the costs and direction will be set largely by Fujifilm.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Ross.
Thanks, Ren. Yep.